This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show for the week of March the 17th, 2013. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, and we look at them from a higher perspective, from a spiritual perspective, from the idea that as we create each of these things that unfolds before us, that it is an opportunity for us to dive into it, if you will, and learn from it, to grow and become that which we truly are, or understand more fully that which we truly are, which is oneness, which is divine mind, which is the highest form of intelligence, all flowing through us, which is God or Spirit or whatever it is that you would prefer to use, or just the universe, perhaps, if you have opposition to that kind of terminology. You may think of it as the great human mind, or any way that you wish to think of it. The more we become aware of it and how it's working in our lives, the stronger that we become as people, as spiritual beings, as mothers, fathers, workers, sons, daughters, whatever our various roles in the world are. When we begin to see how we play those roles, and we begin to see how they are connected and how we are connected, it changes your mind, it strengthens your mind, and helps you to become less stressed, less fearful, because you recognize that fear is an illusion, as is so many other things, and that as an illusion, it has no real substance or basis in which it can hurt you, unless you let it. So all of these things come into play in my particular point of view on this show, and it certainly isn't just my point of view. It's the point of view of many writers, philosophers, theorists, many of whom I talk about on this show, spiritual leaders, of course, in miracles, if you're familiar with that. My goodness, Deepak Chopra. My goodness, the list just goes on and on. I could spend the entire half hour just listing all of these great writers and philosophers and thinkers who are saying essentially the same thing that I'm saying. But if you're listening to this show, chances are you know at least one, or probably a lot more of them. So I won't spend too much time on that. I will get on with our show today. A couple of things happened this week that struck me as interesting to talk about from a spiritual perspective. Well, first of all, you've all been perhaps waiting with bated breath to find out when the new conclave will begin, so that they can start this process of choosing the new pope. And the cardinals announced on Friday that it will begin Tuesday morning. So Tuesday morning they will be sequestered. We'll talk about that term later. as it's being used in other arenas as well. But they will be cloistered away, sorting through their choices for who's going to be the next pope. It's a very secretive process, so no one is allowed to know what goes on, but basically it's a spiritual process in which they are guided by God to make the choice for God's representative on earth, at least according to Catholic belief systems. And so it's very hush-hush. No one can know about it because only the cardinals are privy to the inner workings of spirit and of God, and they are the only ones entitled to know such things, and no one else shall know these things, and on it goes. That's very typical of religions, but it's interesting to see how that whole mechanism plays out in a circumstance that is really quite unusual for the Catholic Church, in the stepping down of a pope, because as you know, usually this only happens after the previous pope has passed away. So there is precedent. About 400 or 500 years ago, there was a pope apparently who stepped down as well, but I talked about this several weeks ago on the show. This is quite a powerful statement. Just the stepping down of the Pope, in that he is recognizing how much I think the Church needs to change, needs to be revolutionized, if you will. And I think he just realized that it needed to happen, and it needed to happen in a way that he just could not do. And that is a real thoughtful, honest thing to do, to get yourself out of the way when you feel as if you cannot go with the changes that are happening. And so I think that's the reason behind his stepping down more than any ill health, although, he does appear to have some health issues, but they don't seem to be anything, more than any other, 80-something-year-old man would have. I think it's more to the point that he realizes what's happening, what's going on in the church, and that the time for change is upon us. And he does not want to be the avatar of that change for whatever reasons. So, in any case, it will be interesting to see who they pick. There are a couple of younger choices, and not necessarily so, but in general, a younger pope might bring more energy to the church at a time when it does need to be assessing itself, at the very least. So it'll be very interesting to see how this process plays out. So as you may or may not know, the way we know that the new pope has been chosen is when white smoke comes out of the chimney of their little space there where they make this decision. Until that choice is made, black smoke comes out of the chimney. So they've just built the chimney and it's ready to go on Tuesday. So stay tuned, and if you're interested in such things, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens and who they pick. As I say, it is supposed to be, a divinely inspired choice, so it may not make any rhyme or reason to, those who want to intellectualize it, those who are used to looking at these things from, either a political standpoint or sports, game. They're looking for the strategy behind the choice of the Pope. There's not supposed to be a strategy behind it, really. It'll be interesting to see if there actually does appear to be one, but it's not supposed to be a strategical exercise like, figuring out, who you're going to pick to represent you politically, or figuring out who to put out on the field during the game, or what have you. It's supposed to be a divinely inspired choice, which means you let go of all of that stuff, and you let Spirit or God or whatever you wish to call it work through you. So it'll be interesting to see if they do that, actually. All right, then, time to move on. Now, I mentioned that word sequester before, which is very much in the news, of course, since in this case, sequester means, it still means a hiding away, but instead of a hiding away of people, which it usually refers to, this is a hiding away of monies, a squirreling away of monies, instead of spending them where they normally are supposed to go. So this has led to some very drastic cuts in many programs across the board. This process started March the 1st, so many of the cuts that are going to happen haven't quite happened yet. It's going to be a gradual process over several months, from what I understand. But many people will be furloughed, or perhaps lose their jobs, or have programs shut down. Head Start, the educational program is going to be cut. Many things will, including, emergency services, firemen, policemen, that kind of thing. It's expected to affect all of those sorts of things, down the line. And interestingly enough, at the same time, we have the stock market rising to its highest level in many a year. In other words, the stock market is having a blast, and it's very interesting to take a look at these factors that are happening. And the other factor, of course, is that the jobs report came in, and more jobs were made, and than were expected, and the unemployment rate has dropped significantly. And of course, this is all before the sequester happened, so now people are worried about, well, when the sequester hits, how will this affect unemployment? So it's interesting to see how our monetary system is working. These ideas of cuts and austerity, which have also been playing a huge role in Europe for the past few years, and not a very positive one. It all reminds me of, well, there are many prosperity teachings, in New Age communities, in other spiritual communities, which basically explain that when you have a concept of lack, when what you see is lack, that's what you create. And by focusing on lack, you create more lack. And creating lack is an illusion, because all around us is abundance. And abundance is all there is. So by focusing on all of these so-called deficits, and by acting as though there is lack, we are creating a false set of circumstances that are not helping us to fulfill our our abundance, to live abundantly, as we all should, as we all can, as we all will do once we recognize that abundance is everywhere. And so that, I think, is one of the many lessons to think about when you hear these stories about the drastic cuts and the sequester and all of that kind of thing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, in that respect, a book by a philosopher, Yale graduate, mathematics genius by the name of Charles Eisenstein, and the book is Sacred Economy. So I've been reading this book. It's a fantastic look at the use of money and how it has changed, what money has become, and what capitalism has turned it into, and how it has become an expression of our belief in separation. And he traces how money has been used, or money was used in the ancient days, and how economies developed in the ancient days as gift economies. In other words, economies worked in the sense that you gave something to someone, and someone gave something back to you in return. And that sort of exchange was a connection, a physical expression of our connection to one another, our oneness to one another, our stewarding all of the abundance around us back and forth towards one another and throughout, without a sense of ownership, without a sense of this is mine, that's yours, without a sense of even competition for scarce resources. In fact, there was not an idea of scarcity. In fact, there was the idea of the commons, which Charles Eisenstein talks about in this book. The commons was the idea that everything belonged to everyone else. And a great example of that is Native American belief system. They did not believe in land ownership. They didn't believe that they owned the land that their tribe happened to be living on at the time, any more than anybody else did. And the idea that they could sell this land to Europeans who came over was laughable to them. They didn't understand what the European sense of land ownership meant, because they were still living as the ancients had lived in Europe before the coming of the well, I would say around 16th, 17th century, when these things began to arise, when the idea of private ownership began to take hold and be legalized and sort of solidified into the governments of Western Europe. The Native Americans living in this country were still living under the idea of the Great Commons that all ancient civilizations had lived under for most of human history. So when Europeans came and wanted to buy land from them, uh, well, it just seemed like a silly idea to them. But they went along with it until, let's not get into that whole terrible history. That's a whole other show to talk about, but I'm sure that you understand what happened there. I want to come back to Sacred Economics, this book by Charles Eisenstein. He explains how, in order for the monetary system to work the way that it has, one has to take from the commons being that which used to belong to everybody, privatize it, and sell it back to people. And some great examples he gives of that are, for instance, the whole concept of intellectual property, that an idea that you come up with is yours and you own it and you have the right to sell it. That is a great example because, if you're coming from a perspective of, all minds being linked, then every idea is everyone else's idea as well. And if you happen to be chosen to be a spokesperson for that idea, that's wonderful, and you should get some reward for that. But that does not mean that the idea is owned by you. Of course, that goes completely against the entire grain of what our, economy is based on, but that is spiritual truth. An idea, a song, comes to you. Where does it come from? Is it just your mind that it comes from? Or do you tap into other minds as well? Aren't songs that you create influenced by every other song that you've heard in your life? If you write a song, it's inspired by many other songs that you've written. You may come up with something different and unique, or put the ideas together in a different way. But songs are basically made up of notes. That's the basic essence of them. And they're notes arranged in different ways to create different sounds, but they are all basically notes. They are all basically one. So there is nothing that unique in one song or another that would make it belong to someone. But of course, again, that goes against how our economy works, and of course it would also be very difficult for musicians to make a living, or big corporate interests to make billions of dollars off of musicians trying to make a living, and on it goes. So what Eisenstein does in this book is to show us how the money system has contributed to our sense of alienation, our belief in separation, our belief in scarcity, and how it necessitates us to continually emphasize growth. Everything has to grow, and grow and grow and grow. And by growth, I don't mean growth in a positive way. Growth means that you have to find economic growth. Means that you have to find new things to sell to people, basically. When you've run out of things to sell, you have to find new stuff to sell. So the stuff that you find to sell is usually stuff that comes from the great commons. In other words, stuff that used to be available to all people, limitlessly. All of a sudden, somebody comes up with an idea or a way to make money from that by claiming to own it and then selling it back. Another example of that is Eisenstein's example of how childhood imagination has been sort of co-opted and used in commercials, cartoons, video games, and then sold back to children. So this is sort of selling back children's own imagination to them. He comes from a time when, there wasn't this proliferation of video games and television. I think television probably was just beginning when he was a young man. But even in my lifetime, when I had television, of course, growing up, but we spent a great deal of time outside creating our own worlds, because we didn't have video games to do. We had comic books. Those were great worlds to dive into. So in that sense, the comic book sort of sold your imagination back to you, but in a strange way, reading comic books, reading books of any kind is a symbiotic process. So the comic books that I used to read stimulated my imagination and made me create even more imaginative worlds. What he's talking about is television and video games, because they are so visceral, because those worlds are so created in and of themselves, with all of the visuals, all of the sounds, everything taken care of for you. It doesn't stimulate your imagination the way that reading a comic book or a book might do. So that's another example he gives of how the commons is used to create something to sell. And he has a suggestion, since, as he says, he sees all of this has to come to an end, and he sees that it is coming to an end. He sees that we're where we are economically today because of this approach, because making money now belongs to those who own money that they can give to others, and money that earns interest creates this kind of system. So I don't want to explain the whole book to you right now, but I want to recommend it to you. Sacred Economics is the name of it. Charles Eisenstein is the author. We'll talk more about it. I'm hoping that perhaps I'll be able to get an interview with him at some point. He would be a great person to talk to on this show. But for now, just remember the name, Sacred Economics. You can even find some videos of his on YouTube, so you can check it out. Now, to close off the show, and I can't believe that a half hour has gone by so fast, but it does go by fast. I wanted to talk about a running theme in our show. We've been talking about how depression can be alleviated through the use of different techniques. And one of the great techniques to do it is yoga. I have suffered, mild bouts of depression, not clinical depression, but normal depression. And certainly yoga is a mood lifter. But I have a sister who had clinical depression and fought with this horrible, horrible disease for many years. And it's a very common illness, apparently, in the United States. When my sister first had it in the 90s, there was still very little known about it. Since then, there's been almost an epidemic of anxiety and depression. And we can certainly talk about the spiritual causes behind that, but that's another show. For now, I wanted to talk about some poses that you can use that can help you, whether it's clinical depression you're dealing with or just a case of the blahs and the blues. All of these will help you. The forward fold. It's very easy. It's standing still and bending forward as far as you can. The goal is to try to put your palms flat on the yoga mat with your legs straight and hold the pose for 2 minutes or more. And that is one pose. Another is the head to knee forward bend. It's basically a seated position where you fold your body forward as far as you can go, arms stretched out. Hopefully you're able to reach as far enough so that your forehead can touch your legs. And this is a position, again, you want to hold for several minutes. That can really help calm the mind as well as stretch, the body and stimulate your internal organs as well. So those are 2 poses, and we'll get back to more of them on our next show. But once again, it's time to close.